The NFC North is expected to be one of the most interesting divisions this season. Now, Aaron Rodgers and his reign on that division is gone. He's off to New York. And right now, the Detroit Lions, believe it or not, are the favorites to win the NFC North. Welcome right into Gold Sheet TV. I am your host, Eric Pauly, with my co-host, Dan Alexander, at Newbie Talks on Twitter. And today, of course, we're talking some NFC North. Before we get into it, I want to remind everybody to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to help us grow. All three Gold Sheet products, Extra, Confidential, and Gold Sheet, are now one product on GoldSheet.com, and all the LTS picks that were on GoldSheet.com are now on WagerTalk.com. And we have baseball picks as well, are up on WagerTalk.com. So I know we're talking football, but if you're still into baseball, hop on over to WagerTalk and get that package. But then let's get right into it. So the Detroit Lions last season, they start off slow. They finally click. They go on this crazy run. They did their part in trying to secure their own playoff spot besides that game they lost against the Carolina Panthers. But, of course, the Seahawks knocked them out. Now, heading into this season, Detroit is the darlings of the NFL world at this point, right? Like, the pundits and the fans are all obsessed with them. They think Dan Campbell is great. The offense, by many metrics, was one of the best in the NFL, which was, you have to give credit where it's due. That offense was humming. But now you have a situation where the Lions are plus 140 to win their own division, the NFC North. Dan, at this point now, do you think that the Lions are overhyped, or is this a good football team?
I mean, the thing is are they overhyped, or are they just hyped and we're not used to seeing the Lions have preseason expectations? I think so much of maybe the feeling that this team is a little bit too overhyped heading into the season is the fact that, it's just not what we've come to expect from a Detroit Lions off season. But they do have absolute studs up and down this offense. Like you mentioned, like their offensive metrics were incredible, but yet they still stumble out of the gate. They win, 1 of 6, or they go 1-6 to start the year, and then they rattle off 8 out of their last 10. So sure, they were at least competitive last season. However, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they had to stay competitive offensively because they just weren't really stopping people with any regularity. I mean, when they were at home, it was just tell me what the number is and let me take over on that. And I don't know if that changes this year because offensively, I mean, studs all over. Amon-Ra St. Brown, decent compliments in a Josh Reynolds and a Marvin Jones if they can stay healthy. And with the offensive line that they have, Jared Goff in his whole entire career has shown if I have time, I can make things happen downfield. And then you just look at what's happening with them in the running back room. Sure, you lose some continuity there, but I think David Montgomery is a fine replacement to add and pair with their first-round pick and Jahmyr Gibbs, who he could potentially be an absolute fantasy stud with who's in front of him. So overhyped? I don't think so. I think maybe in the odds world, it gives me a little bit of pause seeing them as favorites, but I think the excitement around this team is real. It's palpable, and I think Dan Campbell definitely has his finger on the pulse, while maybe I have some questions on what he does game day.
Yeah, so just to put things in perspective, right now looking at DraftKings, the Lions are plus 140 to win the NFC North, which is the favorites, but it's not like they're negative odds there as if they're fully expecting. So it is telling that the market does think that there is a situation where the Lions are not living up to this hype. But I think you made some great points because, simply put, this is a good football team. What they did offensively last year was only rivaled by the Chiefs. Now, am I expecting that same exact offensive outbursts to continue? On one hand, no, because now teams will have all this tape on Ben Johnson and how he likes to run his offense. So now, just with any situation in football, the more that the other teams know, the more they study you. It's now on his shoulders to kind of adjust. But you mentioned the wide receiver room. You also failed to Jamison Williams, their first round pick last year, who was suspended for the first 6 games for gambling. Only the first 6 games he was gambling in college, so he'll be back in this mix. And Detroit also had one of the worst injury lucks on offense last year, and they were still able to put up those offensive numbers. So the team with a stout offensive line, very stout, we're talking top 10 in the NFL, simply on the offensive line, with weapons that are really, really good on the outside and in the backfield. And now, like you said, Jared Goff, throughout his career, the way to get to Jared Goff is to pressure Jared Goff. If Jared Goff has all day to throw the football, he's going to be a decent quarterback. So the Lions right now have the makings of a really good team. And defensively, the way that they added TJ Gardner-Johnson, Emmanuel Mosley, Cameron Sutton, Alex Anzalone, they drafted Jack Campbell in the first round as well. I personally would have liked to have seen them not take the luxury pick in Gibbs and take a more established defender there. But I think that this team, from a talent perspective now, they're undeniable. The next question then becomes, is Dan Campbell the guy to right the ship? I'll start by saying I thought coming into last year, he was an absolute joke. He started off 1-6. I felt validated. Then the way that they turned the season around, I can't say that he is a bad coach at this point when I really thought that it was the case. So talk to me, Dan. What are your thoughts on Dan Campbell?
Well, I think the biggest strength that you can say about Dan Campbell is his players absolutely love him. I mean, if you look up player coach in the dictionary, probably Dan Campbell is going to have his picture right up there with Andy Reid as far as how he's able to get a locker room to believe in the thing that he's selling. Sure, he's a little bit over the top at times. Sure, he's a little bit emotional, but this team seems to be responding to it. I think, his tenor is perfect for a Detroit market. The fans absolutely adore this guy and would go to war for him. And I think that travels over to the locker room as well. As far as the X's and O's, I think he also does a good job of taking his coordinators and putting them in positions to succeed, where he's kind of just the hype man. He kind of has become the de facto mascot of the team, and he just allows his coordinators to shine. There is some concern, though. I mean, 17, 20, 28 and 1 in his third year as the head coach of the Lions here. So can he improve upon that a little bit? Finally, get that north of 500. I give credit where it's due to the Lions organization too, giving him some thread to work with instead of just giving him rope to hang himself with. I think this roster's gotten better, and that can only be attributed to him and what he brings in, as well as partnering him with the general management staff there. So the thing that does concern me, though, is they did start out of the gate that 1-6. And sure, they were able to turn things around. It's about getting hot at the right time. But who's to say that they don't come in stumbling and reading their own press clippings a little bit into this year? So do I think he's a bad coach? No. Do I think he's an insane Belichick X's and O's guy? Absolutely not. But sometimes in the NFL, all you need is a guy who can get his finger on the pulse of a team. And Dan Campbell, like I said earlier, absolutely hits that mark. So, I'm kind of neutral on him. I don't dislike him. I think he does enough to at least not hurt the team. While he might not be adding any wins to the schedule with what he brings from an X's and O's perspective, I think always having a former player who knows the rigmaroles of the NFL season is going to be great as the head coach of the team. So, I'm kind of neutral on Dan Campbell, but I definitely love the clips that he gives us. We get laughs from Dan Campbell every single week. So never change Dan Campbell.
I completely agree with you here, right? So especially considering like where Dan Campbell came from, like he's a descendant at this point now from like the Bill Parcells coaching tree, right? Like he worked under with Sean Payton in New Orleans for a long time. Of course, Campbell played for Parcells, and of course Parcells and Payton have great ties. So it's not like this guy with his eccentric personality came out of nowhere and just like, kind of like Ted Lassoed his way into being like this head coach of the Detroit Lions and like making things work out and having it be all good and fun. He clearly is a great motivator. The team clearly buys into what he does. And a big thing that you said is he just lets his coordinators do their job, which is partially the role of an NFL head coach. Obviously, we have so many coaches who are defensive specialists or offensive specialists, and they're basically the coordinators in that perspective. Like if you're an Andy Reid or a Bill Belichick, of course you're going to be, coaching the offense and the defense respectively. Dan Campbell, you're a leader of men and a motivator. You better have a great defensive coordinator and offensive coordinator at your disposal. Yep. So I agree that the self-awareness to not, even though he comes from this great coaching tree, he learned a lot, is to delegate responsibilities, and he focused on in-game decisions and helping his players be the best that they can be, I think is a trait that is beyond underrated. So I'll gladly say that from last year into this year, like last year I was literally in my coaching rankings, I had Dan Campbell I want to say 31 or 30. I know I had Robert Saleh at dead last, and I still believe that Saleh is not a good coach. But Dan Campbell has turned my opinion around on him, his awareness, and his motivating. It's what's there to hate at this point, right, Dan?
Exactly. And like I said, we're always going to get some darn good clips out of Dan Campbell. So no hate coming the way from the Gold Sheet preview here for sure.
So moving on to the Chicago Bears, another team that's just expected to be so interesting this season, and it's very clear to see why. This team went on a spending spree this offseason, and they also, of course, traded away the number one pick in the draft that they had. They could have elected to cut the Justin Fields era short and go in the way of a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. Instead, they trade back, and in that trade back, they acquire wide receiver DJ Moore, and they also use that draft pick to draft tackle Darnell Wright to basically say, hey, Justin, we know last year you ran for your life most of the time, and you had receivers who basically were probably only good in the CFL. But now this year, we're going to give you some weapons and give you a better offensive line. Not to mention the Bears had one of the worst defenses in football, so they paid a crap ton of money to try to repair that. And I think some of those moves were actually not necessarily some of the better moves. But we just got to go right to under center, Dan. Justin Fields, what are your thoughts on him?
I mean, the jury's still out for me. I mean, let's be honest. What he can do is unbelievable. The speed at which he plays at is just a thing of beauty. I mean, if you're a fantasy football player, having a guy like that can get you those rushing touchdown points as opposed to just 4 points for passing touchdowns, he's your dream because 17 passing touchdowns, 11 interceptions. That's the part that gives me pause with Justin Fields. That's not going to get it done. However, there's a reason why he now holds the NFL single game rushing record. There's a reason why he became only the third quarterback in NFL history to reach 1,000 yards. And that reason is he hasn't come along as a passer just yet. Now, he has a rocket of an arm. So if he could hone that in a little bit, you get a quarterback coach who's able to have his accuracy come up a little bit. That's gonna pay dividends for this team because they finally, like you said, they added some pieces offensively. However, when I look at this roster, especially on the offense side of the ball, I couldn't agree more about how you feel about the defensive acquisitions they had with giving up the most points in the league last season. It's not going to get it done just bringing in some guys. And guys is really what I think of. Yeah, guys is what I think of when I think of this Bears team. Because to me, it looks like, you look at the skill players, a banged up Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool who's coming off an injury. Now DJ Moore, finally you get some speed in that core to pair with some of that size. But then your running backs, Dante Foreman, Khalil Herbert, like the offense to me, to stick with the fantasy analogy, looks like the guy who uses his first round pick on Josh Allen, and then he's just trying to retcon all the other positions. It seems like they have Justin Fields and then just a bunch of guys offensively. And that's what I look at with this whole roster. It's not that they're an absolute, it's not like it's a dearth of talent on this team. There's just not much that gets me excited outside of what you have from Justin Fields. And when you're game planning in the NFL, all of these coaches now have a whole entire season. Think about the year 2 struggles, at least on the ground you saw for Lamar Jackson in teams that he played the second or third time around. So it'll be interesting to see. Do we see that same kind of regression when teams have a little bit more familiarity with the speed and quickness which Justin Fields plays with, or is he just a human cheat code? That's going to be found out this season, but it's not like he has much around him to help him boost up those stats, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So while last year as a passer, we'll see clips on Twitter. It's like, are you sure Justin Fields isn't a good passer with him throwing like one good throw? It's like, bro, look at the season-long metrics, right? Like you could find one good throw from any NFL quarterback if they're in the National Football League. I'm sure they made a good throw in their life. But things that stick out to me with the Bears is that offensive line I am still not sold on. Of course, adding a rookie who can hopefully be there for the long haul is a great addition. Also, Nate Davis is a help there, but still not one of the better offensive lines in football. And what I'm looking at, though, is with Justin Fields, I actually own him in my dynasty league, so I hope that he'll be good. I don't have really a strong opinion for or against. I think it's obvious he's not a great thrower. I think his athleticism, though, is obviously also off the charts. So I'm just going to say like 50-50 on him. I could see both directions. I'm not hammering any over props. I'm not betting MVPs. I'm also not betting any unders on Justin Fields. My thing
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to shift gears and talk more just on their holistic approach on the season. So you have something to Fields specifically, please.
No, I think we clearly are thinking the exact same thing, because I was just going to hop in and say, well, I might not be betting any, overs. I might not be betting any, props for Justin Fields. I look at just their yes, no to make the playoffs, to miss the playoffs. And, I'm not a chalk eater. I'm not really a future bettor, even if it is nice plus money. We've talked about that. But I would be more adept to laying minus 190 on no to miss the playoffs than I would be taking plus 160 on the get back to make the playoffs, is my outlook on this team personally.
No, I completely agree. But the one thing I will look at will be their win total. So last season, the Bears were blown out a lot, but in one score games, they went 1-7, right? In football, just based on how variance and how luck breaks, 1-7 isn't sustainable. Like eventually, like we talked about the luck factor, unless you have Mahomes and you're going 7-1 year after year, which is going to be a thing. Going 1-7 in one true score games is not going to continue. It's going to have to kind of regress to the mean at some point. And also the Bears, like we mentioned on the AFC West, where the Broncos spent the most money in free agency, the Bears are right there under there. So since 2000, there have been 20 similarly underachieving teams in terms of losing in one-score games, like the Bears 1-7, like I mentioned. And 19 of those 20 teams increased their wins next season by an average of 3.5 wins. Then you add in the fact, again, that the Bears spent all this money in free agency. While I'm not sure that they addressed the right position groups, because they spent so much money on the linebacking position when they should have added help at pass rusher and cornerback. But all of those two metrics, the fact that they spent the money and that they were so bad in one-score games, leads you to believe that they have to win more than 3 games. However, are they winning 9 games or are they winning 6 games? You know what I mean? And I would have to venture to say that they're winning closer to 6 than they are 9 this season.
Yeah, and I think at least when you see the schedule sitting alongside you, at least there's a Cardinals game on there. You see that there's a Falcons game on there, but outside of that, they have some competitive games, and you also have to play the AFC West, who you can go back and look at our preview on that one. We think that there's going to be some competitive teams in that division as well. So the game against the Raiders, the game against the Falcons, their 2 games against their in-division opponents, that's going to be the difference of do they go over that season win total. But I'm right there with you. I'm not alt-lining this thing up to try and get some extra plus money. I think maybe you could talk me into looking at their posted season win total, but I don't think this team's going to be competing at least this season for a potential playoff spot. It's just a team that I think is also going to have some trouble maybe covering some spreads just with what that defense brings to the table. And just like you said, I don't know if I saw enough improvement there for a year-over-year leap from how poor they were last season to really taking a leap here into the second year and getting a little better.
Yeah, that defense was just absolutely abysmal last season, and
no way around it
is going to make it that much better whatsoever. But moving on to, in my opinion, I think so. We kind of saved the most interesting 2 teams for last. We talked about the 2 most popular teams first. But now I think that there's more discussion around these next 2 teams. We're going to be starting in Minnesota with the Vikings. Now, we don't need to do too much rehashing of last season. Vikings, 11-win team, win the North, all this crazy metrics and one-score games, obviously unsustainable. They get beat up by the New York Giants nonetheless in the first round of the playoffs. So what do the Vikings do? They go internally, their new GM, I don't want to mispronounce his name because I'm bad at pronunciations, but he has a moment of realism and he realizes that this team is nowhere near as good as their record. They are not a perennial playoff team, and they're better off by being somewhat of sellers in a sense rather than pretending that they're this legitimate playoff team and pushing more chips in the middle of the table. So they let Dalvin Tomlinson walk. They let Adam Thielen walk. They let Patrick Peterson, Cam Dantzler, Duke Shelley walk. They draft Jordan Addison, which will be helpful. And when they made their biggest signings of the offseason, that not players that we were re-signing, they were looking at defensive players, Byron Murphy, Marcus Davenport. So I think that for starters, there's a huge thing to be said for the self-awareness this front office had to realize they're not good enough and then to kind of like do a mini kind of rebuild. So now at this point, considering that they themselves looked at their team and said, we're not as good as we were last year and we kind of needed to reevaluate the roster. They shed more players than they realistically added. Are the Vikings now being somewhat a little bit underrated because now that they looked in the mirror and said we're not as good and they kind of went about things, or the fact that they're self-aware enough to kind of make these moves give you hope that like this team at least knows what they're doing. Which kind of boat are you in there, newbie?
How much of the success as well had to do with Kevin O'Connell coming in? I think he is a terrific head coach, and I'm kind of with you. I love the way that you posed that because while organizationally, it was all about the self-awareness. You could have just rested on the laurels and been able to pitch to fans and really try and pull the wool over people's eyes and just say, no, we're just a couple pieces away. Winning close games is a mark of a good team. It might look like they're saying, hey, let's take a step back here, but they still have a pretty damn good roster, Eric. And now they don't have big brother Aaron Rodgers giving them noogies every single year. So what did they do? They went out and they said, let's get some younger talent and start building up this team with Kevin O'Connell having his guys, not the hangovers from Mike Zimmer and the same song and dance that he was doing. So if a big reason why people are maybe down on the Vikings is because you see some marquee names like Dalvin Cook, who was always injured, or an underwhelming Adam Thielen offensively, there's still this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name's Justin Jefferson. And he's pretty damn good. And his usage is only going to increase. Maybe he even makes it a very good situation for Jordan Addison, as you mentioned, coming out of USC. And then they got better at the tight end position as well. Like TJ Hawkinson is a name that people are always talking about getting down on his props over. And this is an offense that Kirk Cousins needs a strong tight end to really shine. And they have the best that they've had since Kirk has been there. So, yeah, it might seem like they're taking a step back, but I think at least offensively, I don't think there's that markedly of a decrease in what they've done. Sure, you underscored the defensive losses that they have, and I completely agree with that, but it's an offensive league, and this is a team that loves being able to air the ball out, so I'm not sure if losing as much on the defensive side really changes how they game plan for games. So I'm not saying I'm crazy high on the Vikings, but I feel like as far as public perception, I'm definitely a little bit more bullish in this division on the Vikings coming into this year than maybe some are.
And it's easy to see why. Like, you made such great points about the offense. Like, if you're replacing Adam Thielen with Jordan Addison, like at this point, like Adam Thielen, great career, great player, like Jordan Addison's probably going to be an upgrade to Adam Thielen. And with Dalvin Cook, I mean, I know he's trying to get a big deal, the whole running back situation where they feel underpaid, they are underpaid. But the fact that, again, that Minnesota didn't even blink twice to re-sign Max and let Cook go means that they think it's going to a Madden rating season. Dalvin Cook's a 85. They think Alexander Mattisson's 83. They're not like really losing sleep over that loss. I agree with you that Kevin O'Connell's a huge coach. He came from Washington. I wanted him to be the next guy in Washington, D.C., but then we went and hired Rivera. He went to L.A., and now here he is in Minnesota. But in terms of his schedule, this team last year played a very easy schedule, and this season not expected to be too much more difficult either. So I'm in your boat where I'm just going to take a wait-and-see approach with this Vikings team. There's no need to I don't think there's a reason to be fading them, considering that the Bears can easily be bad. The team we're about to talk about next can easily be, and by bad, I mean the Bears and Packers could easily be two of the worst teams in the NFL next season.
Yeah.
But it also could be two good teams. So plus 275 to win the NFC North. I kind of love that. I'm not going to lock that in right away or immediately, but based on how the way the season goes, I mean, the Lions have a pretty tough schedule. So if you like the Lions, I would say wait a little bit and then buy back into them. The Vikings start off in Tampa, then Philly, Los Angeles, and Carolina, then Kansas City. So pretty difficult as well. But I will have my eye on the Minnesota Vikings for the majority of the season. I think I could just simply put it and leave it at that, is the Vikings have my attention this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like that wait and see approach potentially, because here's the thing, 13-4 last season, they're bound to take a step back. It's going to happen after they massively overachieved in Kevin O'Connell's first season, but they can still take a step back in this division and make the playoffs in a weak NFC. And I think you make a good point as well, because odds makers, they're not writing them off. They're the second favorite for this division behind a plus money favorite, if you can say that about the Lions. So 275, if people want to add that to their portfolio, I don't hate that. You also look at the market expectations. They're even money to make the playoffs. And then if you look at their 8.5 season win total, it's juiced to the over. So I think it's more noise than anything that people are down on this football team. I think it's just in stark contrast to what they did last year is maybe where there's some negativity around it. But I'm right here with you, man. I think that if people are writing off the Vikings this year, they're going to be sorely mistaken. And in any season win total pools, or if you're, playing over at the Westgate or anything, I would only be looking towards that over 8.5. Well, I think it's a good number. I think they get around 9-10 wins. And it's not like, as you said, their schedule got markedly tougher than it was last year.
Yeah, completely agree. Minnesota Vikings, a team to don't count out. And they can certainly, they were self-aware enough to know that they weren't that good last year. So that in itself in this league is inspiration, or is inspiring enough to believe that they know what they're doing, right? Like there are some organizations you could say maybe they have no clue what they're doing, or there are probably better ways to go about certain things that even people like ourselves who aren't GMs can still kind of just see, like, what the hell are you kind of doing? Vikings clearly have an understanding of what they're doing. Moving on, again, clearly the most interesting team in this division, the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is gone. It's the Jordan Love era officially going on. There is so much talk about Jordan Love. Is he good? Is he bad? Nobody knows the answer. We had not seen him play football, so how can you definitively say one of those two things? Not saying you, I'm speaking generally. Green Bay Packers come back this season with a very good defense that they had last year, a very good offensive line that is mostly still intact. They added weapons for Jordan Love and also in the draft, and also what Christian Watson did last season, I think, is very underrated. I think he kind of established himself as, I'm not a huge fantasy player myself, but if there is a sleeper, I would consider him to be a sleeper. Now, there's so much talk about in the NFL how every single game matters, and it's true. Obviously, only 17 of them, every game matters, but for being realistic, the games from the beginning of September to the beginning of November, you can start slow and then still make something of your season. At this point, though, Newbie, considering, again, the continuity on this offensive line, the backfield of studs they have, and the ability to have a run game, the fact that they have weapons now, whether or not they are really good is to be seen, and they have a good defense. Are the Packers underrated now also?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say underrated. I can maybe say justly rated. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all because of Jordan Love, and I think he's an unknown commodity. I have friends and family who are big Packers fans, and they're telling me that this guy's going to be an MVP candidate this year. I don't see that happening for Jordan Love because he's a true unknown, and all you can do is look at what he has done. And it's not like he came from the SEC, like he played for Utah State. And I know that he had a new coach in his final season and everything, but 20 touchdowns, 17 interceptions in his final year at Utah State before foregoing his senior year. You look at what he did in 2018, it was incredible. 32 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, and he ends up being the New Mexico Bowl MVP. So, okay, there was that. But I'm talking about 2018. I'm talking about 2019. We're talking about a guy who hasn't really played meaningful football. And when he did, he was doing it in a Mountain West conference. So I don't know how you can say, and these pundits who are saying, no, he's going to be great. I don't know how you can say he's going to be great. I don't know how you say he's going to be terrible. Because the thing is just because the Packers have used this pedigree where we have a guy sit behind a really good quarterback and then we have another really good quarterback, there's no guarantee that Jordan Love is going to do that. So I think this team's sole outlook is based on how Jordan Love is going to perform. And in the same breath that I say that, I say you might be selling the team a little bit short if that's the only way. I think that's a very myopic way to look at this team because they have a borderline elite run game and offensive line. That's a quarterback who's unproven's absolute best friend. Their defense, as you mentioned, it's filled with 8 former first-round picks. So all the first-round picks that they didn't get offensively for their man Aaron Rodgers on the offensive side of the ball, those have been all being used up on the defensive side, trying to have Aaron Rodgers elevate that offense. Can Jordan Love elevate it? It's going to be a completely new look with the athleticism that he brings. So it's all just question marks for me. Like, I wouldn't bet anything on this team preseason because you don't know what they're going to be. If you do have a beat on it, all it's coming from is beat writers and practice footage that you're seeing. I think it's pure conjecture around this team because it's uncharted waters that we're entering into with this Packers squad.
Yeah, this is like the first in a long time, or at least I can remember off the top of my head, like genuine mystery, right? Like you have
genuinely,
like we said, like, there's no way unless you are on the Packers coaching staff and watch him play every single day. You don't have. There's no way you have an opinion on this guy, right? Like it's just impossible. You haven't seen him play enough football, so it's just something that's cool, right? Like in a league where Adam Schefter's tweeting off who went to the bathroom at some point earlier today. Having a genuine mystery about who is under center for one of the prestigious franchises in the league is cool, to say the least. But one thing I will say with going into like betting into the Packers, like right now plus 400 at DraftKings, I'm sure you could shop around and find better. So if you can, please do so. Mm-hmm. Starting off the season with the Bears, Falcons, Saints, Lions, Raiders, Broncos, like their schedule looks really, really weak. The only really good team that I'm seeing them play in terms of quarterbacking is the Chargers week 11, Chiefs week 13. Obviously, not doing a huge deep dive. I'm looking at this now, so if I missed anything, let me know. But like, you're only going to be facing two quarterbacks this whole season that are going to be in the top 10 in most advanced metrics. You probably got a good shot. So I would say that if you are a believer in the Packers, you would probably just hope they lose to the Bears week 1 or the Falcons week 2 and start 0-2, then hop in. But there also definitely is a world where plus 400 is the best price you're going to get on this team, or whatever the equivalent is at a better book with a better line right now. So it actually might make sense if you are a Packers believer or a Love believer, or even just a portfolio builder to get in at the Packers now at plus 400. Do you see any merit with that, newbie?
Yeah, I think it's a great point by you because, yes, there's a reality where they start, 0-3 out of the gate. You look at that schedule, there's also a reality that they start 4-1 out of the gate, and then you have a Broncos team that we said there's plenty of questions around them as well. So, I look at this schedule and I think you can easily come up with 8 wins and cash that over season win totals. But again, like I said, and with the juice you have to lay, with the prices that you have to make, I can't bet this team preseason. This is a team that, much like the Vikings, while I feel like I would be a little bit more confident betting the Vikings because we know what they have coming into this season, this is a team that I feel like after week 4, and the fact that they have a late bye week as well, we're going to know a lot about this team because we're not going to have any layoffs to see how they respond to that. So yeah, this is a team that I wouldn't be doing anything preseason. Although if you are high on the Packers, I'm right there with you. Sure, maybe you can get a plus 500, a plus 600 for them to win the division if they stumble out of the gate here a little bit. But you also could maybe only be able to get a plus 250 if they end up starting off the year that they potentially could and putting their stamp on it. So it's all unknown for me. I don't think there's anything actionable I can give you before the season on the Packers. I just, much like you, I'm excited. The mystery around this team and just from what we've come to expect from the Packers with the layoff that they had last season, with the struggles that they had last season, how much of that had to do with the fact that this team just was sick of Aaron Rodgers. They were tired of the message he was selling, him pointing fingers, this, that, and the other thing. So maybe they go on a spiritual journey of their own. A little ayahuasca does some wonders for the Packers heading into the season, and we'll see what ends up happening. But no bets for me preseason on the Packers, but it is a team I'm very excited to see how things unfold for Jordan Love.
Yeah, the Packers are somebody who is on my radar. So when officially anything that I bet will be on GoldSheet.com or will be on WagerTalk.com with the GoldSheet brand, we have a team that puts out our wagers together, and the Packers are a team that is on my radar. My last point, just simply with the Packers, is I know that Matt LaFleur, like they've won the 13 games over a couple of seasons in a row. Obviously, last year was a bad season. Aaron Rodgers still has bad metrics. Are they done with Rodgers? Vice versa. I wholeheartedly believe that Matt LaFleur is one of the worst head coaches in football. So while, again, this range of outcomes for this team is just so wide that if LaFleur doesn't get in his own way and Love is an average quarterback, this team can win 9 games because their run game, OL, and defense is good enough. However, if Love is terrible, I don't think LaFleur is a good enough coach to overcome everything, and this team is winning 3 games next season. So that's why the devil's advocate. We talk so much about like why this could be a good thing. And maybe, again, I will admit when I'm wrong gladly. I will always change my opinion when presented with new information, but I, again, am a wholehearted believer that Matt LaFleur is a terrible head coach. So that is why it's so wide of a range, if you ask me, newbie.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. There are 2 major possibilities for this team. And before we wrap things up here, Eric, I just wanted to correct one thing I said. I was scrolling around my notes there. It is a week 6 bye that you're looking at here for the Packers. So I was talking about it being later in the season. I think this is a really nice spot that you and I in week 6 will do a little state of address. You know, we're kind of both, looking at bated breath with this team. But by week 6, I'll know my full outlook on this team. By week 3, I'll probably know my outlook on this team. So this is definitely a team that maybe we have a weekly update, the Jordan Love tracker that we'll have here on Gold Sheet TV. So I just wanted to correct something that is a week 6 bye week that we'll be having for this team. So a good spot for them, and we'll know a lot about this team and potential ways to get down on them definitely by that point in the season.
We will certainly be able to finally start solving the mystery of Jordan Love and the Packers. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of a Gold Sheet TV NFL preview. Next week, newbie is on vacation, so we're still up in the air if we're going to be talking the last 2 divisions. We might get some college football back in the fold, obviously. That is right around the corner as well. But again, best way to help support us grow is liking the video and subscribing to the channel. We appreciate every single one of you. Thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.